To my Black Americans, my gorgeous Black men and women in America, I just want to say you guys are so fucking resilient. It's so shameful how dishonest our history books are about what happened in this country, what happened to Black Americans, how we treated people, and how this country came to be. It is so shameful. I finally am reading the 1619 Project. I've had it on my bookshelf for like a couple years, and I read a ton. And finally, I got into it, and it just... whew. The fact that when we wrote our Constitution, when white men wrote our Constitution and had the audacity to say that men are created equal, all men are created equal, while those same people writing those lines owned human beings, enslaved human beings, the hypocrisy is just fucking astounding. The way that these people are framed as heroes, despite the grotesque abuses that they committed, it is like insane and disgusting. And the fact that Black Americans, even though they were treated like, there's no word. It's not, they weren't treated like animals. They were just absolutely fucking tortured for so long. And the fact that they believed in the ideals that were written in that Constitution, despite how they were treated for so long, and that they fought for this country to live up to those ideals. This country would not be anything. This country wouldn't be fuck shit without Black Americans fighting nonstop for centuries, for generations, for equality. And we're not there. We're not even close. We're not there. Black Americans actually believe in democracy. They actually believe in equality. They actually believe in freedom. I just have to say it's remarkable. And Black Americans are so strong. It's incredible. It is incredible how strong you guys are. I'm sorry I'm crying. It's just thinking about it all is just insane to me, what generations of Black Americans have been through and what they continue to go through, and the gaslighting is just crazy. At the beginning of the 1619 Project, the author wrote that if we would only be honest about the history of this country, then we might have the opportunity to live up to the ideals that we claim are the foundation of our society. And we'll never live up to those ideals until we are honest about our history. And I just agree with that so much. I don't understand what everybody's so afraid of. Why are people so afraid to tell the truth about our history, about white supremacy, about whiteness? If this country ever wants to live up to the ideals that it claims it stands by, then we've got to tell the truth. I love my Black Americans, and I totally understand the anger and the helplessness and the frustration and just anything and everything y'all feel like. I totally understand. I don't understand from personal experience, obviously, but I understand just thinking about it, conceptualizing it, considering what you guys have been through for so long and how that would make me feel. Anyways, if anybody has any more book recommendations written by Black Americans, talking about the real honest history of America, talking about racism, talking about feminism, just honestly fantasy books, fiction novels, anything written by Black Americans, I want to consume as much as possible. Of course, I'm going to go look stuff up on my own, and I have lots of books on my bookshelf already, but just if anything's ever, really landed with anybody watching this that they would consider like mandatory reading, please let me know, because I will jump on it immediately. Sending love.
No, this one got heated so fast. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this one was so heated. Yeah. Anyway, what's up guys? Welcome back to yet another reaction video by Saleni. If you're new to this channel, kindly remember to push the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also remember to share it as we go deep down into our reaction video today.
Things you never learned in high school or college, for that matter.
How many of you all saw me and knew that this was about to go wrong for some translucent glowworm? And a translucent glowworm that actually puts mediocre in their name, this can't turn out good. Let's get it.
The United States had a census in 1830. In 1830, 3,379 free black men owned 12,795 slaves. At that time, there were about 27 million whites in America.
How many white people did he say was in America in 1830? Because the census from 1830 only put the population of the country at 12,888,020. And of those, 2,009,043 were slaves. So if I subtract this 2,009,043 from the 12,866,020, I come up with 10,856,977. So the math ain't mathing already on your 27 million BS claim. Now let's get back to your math. Let's say that I give you the fact that 12,795 slaves were owned by 3,379 black people, and I subtracted that number from your 2,009,043 slaves. That would still leave 1,996,248 slaves being owned by white people. But we'll come back to that.
385,000 owned slaves. That was 1.4% of the entire population. But the point is, you cannot know whose ancestor did what to whom.
What? You can't know whose ancestors did what to whom? What one of my ancestors was sitting on the Supreme Court when the Dred Scott decision was handed down? Who do you think enacted the Fugitive Slave Act? Their ancestors literally sent postcards around the country with the degrading and dehumanizing things they did to my ancestors to show all their friends. What in the entire fuck are you talking about?
Because in 1830, 3,300 black men owned 12,700 slaves. That means they went and bought them. They bought their own people, and they enslaved their own people right here on American soil.
You talk about high school. What about things you never read in your entire existence? Like this book by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, which talks about free Negro owners of slaves in the United States in 1830. Which the concept of benevolent slavery is explained. See, when you've been kidnapped and dragged across the Atlantic in chains and enslaved in a foreign land that even if you could somehow become free, you never can get back home, you learn to use the system that has been used against you. See, the enslaved black people in this country, they understood your capitalism long before you even understood our language. And slaves that were permitted to earn money in their spare time sometimes made enough money to buy their freedom. And another route after buying their freedom, they earned money to buy the freedom of their friends and relatives. And if you take the time to even dig further, you will find out that some who bought slaves in this way didn't formally free them for years, partially because freemen paid higher taxes than slaves or white people, Courts since colonial times had recognized the right of free black people to own slaves. This gave rise to an odd arrangement in which people lived as free but were legally somebody else's property. Also of note, between 1800 and 1830, slave states began to restrict manumission, seeing free black people as potential fomenters of slave rebellion. Now you could buy your friend, but you couldn't free them unless they left the state, which for the freed slave could mean leaving behind family still in bondage. So many free black people took to owning slaves benevolently. And I will also note that rocket raccoons existed then also. And if you know, then you know. But most black slave owners fell into the class of benevolent slave owners. Also, the 1830 census is imperfect. That 3,770 whatever figure that is often quoted, that number could be off in either direction because it didn't distinguish between slaves the household owned, live-in slaves that were hired, and slaves who merely lodged at the household. In a few cases, the census listed known white slaveholders as black. Now, what were you ending on?
It's just something you never heard about. A little fact that was kind of written out of history.
The irony of listening to somebody say that whose entire ancestral line is used to the same thing he was doing just then in whitewashing history. But what do we expect with somebody that voluntarily puts mediocre in their TikTok handle?
When studying American history, one of the most important questions to answer is how did Americans justify slavery? How did they convince themselves that they had the right to own black people as property? What we find is that they had numerous ways to justify slavery, including philosophy, religion, science, and straight-up lies and self-deception. One prominent way that slave owners justified slavery was by turning to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who is without a doubt one of the most famous philosophers in human history. American education in the 18th and 19th centuries had a heavy focus on ancient Greece and Rome, and Aristotle's philosophy was studied by many Americans, including the Founding Fathers. Even though Aristotle was extremely intelligent and a very influential thinker, he left the world a dark legacy when it came to his views on slavery. Aristotle believed that slavery was normal and natural, and that some men were born to be masters and others were born to be slaves. He argued that humanity is divided into two, the masters and the slaves, or those who have the right to command and those who are born to obey. Therefore, to justify slavery, all American slave owners had to do was point to Aristotle. They argued that white men were the natural-born masters and black people were the natural-born slaves. However, an even greater justification for slavery than Aristotle was Christianity. Slave owners frequently justified the right to own black people as property by citing the Bible and arguing that slavery was sanctioned by God. As Samuel F.B. Morse put it, slavery per se is not a sin. It is a social construction ordained from the beginning of the world for the wisest purposes, benevolent and disciplinary, by divine wisdom. There are plenty of passages from both the Old and New Testament that condone slavery. For example, Exodus provides detailed rules about owning slaves and tells slave owners that the slave is their property. In the New Testament, Paul says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to gain their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord." Slave owners would often read the Bible out loud to their slaves to show them that God approved of their enslavement. For example, when Solomon Northrop was enslaved in Louisiana, his master would preach pro-slavery sermons on Sundays. His favorite part of the Bible was Luke chapter 12, verse 47, which states, "The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready, or does not do what the master wants, will be beaten with many blows." Solomon Northrop described how after reading this line, his master would explain, "That inward that don't take care, that don't obey his Lord, that's his master. That there inward shall be beaten with many stripes." Now many signifies a great many. 40, 100, 150, that's scripture. One of the most popular ways that slave owners used the Bible to justify slavery was through the curse of Ham. Most of you are probably familiar with the story of Noah. In Genesis, we learn that God told Noah he was going to destroy the world in a great flood, and he instructed Noah to build an ark and fill it with 2 of every animal so he could repopulate the world after the flood was over. In the story, Noah obeyed God, and after the flood, he became a drunk. I mean, you can't really blame him. He did just watch God annihilate nearly every living being on earth. In Genesis, we hear of a strange story that involves one of Noah's drinking binges. One day, Noah gets drunk and passes out naked. His son Ham sees him and tells his 2 brothers, who cover up their father with a blanket. When Noah wakes up and realizes that his son saw him naked and dishonored him, he curses Ham's son Canaan and says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be." Some Americans interpreted this passage from the Bible to mean that all of Ham's descendants were forever doomed to be slaves, and they argued that black skin was the mark of the curse of Ham. Therefore, when Americans sought to justify slavery, all they had to do was say it wasn't their fault. It was Noah who cursed them to be slaves, and since this came from the Bible, it was seen as the word of God. This story might seem ridiculous, but many slave owners used this argument to rationalize their right to own black people. It didn't matter that this story was irrational and absurd. The point is that they were able to use Christianity as an excuse to abuse and exploit black people. Slave owners also justified slavery through the scientific theories of the time, which were heavily influenced by racism and white supremacy. For example, the French scientist Georges Cuvier argued that there were 3 distinct races of human beings: the white Caucasian, the yellow Mongolian, and the black Ethiopian. He said the Caucasian is distinguished by the beauty of the oval formed by his head and the color of his hair. To this variety, the most highly civilized nations, and those which have generally held all others in subjection, are indebted for their origin. On the other hand, he argued, the Negro has always remained in the most complete state of utter barbarism. For scientists like this, the fact that white people enslaved black people was simply a law of nature. For men like this, slavery was the natural state of the black race. Others, like the French naturalist Georges Louis Buffon, believed that whites were helping black people by enslaving them. He believed that if black people were introduced to the cooler climate of the Americas, their skin would naturally turn white. He argued that in Europe, we behold the human form in its greatest perfection, and this is where we ought to form our ideas of the real and natural color of man. He said that if black people lived long enough in a cold climate, then their skin would become as white as the natives of Europe. Therefore, he believed that slavery was good for black people because it would eventually turn them white, which was the natural and perfect state of humanity. Never mind that human beings originated in Africa. Even abolitionists who opposed slavery still held racist ideas about black people. For example, the Philadelphia doctor Benjamin Rush believed that black skin was a disease that could be cured, and through the right treatment, black people could eventually become white. Another way that Americans justified slavery is arguing that by enslaving black people, they were doing them a favor. They argued that slavery was a moral good and benefited the slave. The man most responsible for this theory was George Fitzhugh from Virginia. In 1854, he published a book called Sociology for the South, where he argued that black people were inferior to whites and had to be slaves for their own good. Fitzhugh disagreed with the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Instead, he argued, men are not born physically, morally, or intellectually equal. It would be far nearer to the truth to say that some were born with saddles on their backs and others booted and spurred to ride them, and the riding does them good. For Fitzhugh, black people were born to be slaves. He argued, the Negro is but a grown child and must be governed as a child. The master occupies toward him the place of parent or guardian. Fitzhugh believed that a free black person was an oxymoron and said he would become an insufferable burden to society. Society has the right to prevent this and can only do so by subjecting him to domestic slavery. Fitzhugh argued that the Negro race is inferior to the white race, and if black people were ever to live in freedom next to whites, then gradual but certain extermination would be their fate. Therefore, Fitzhugh believed that by enslaving black people, whites were helping them. He said that slavery Christianizes, protects, supports, and civilizes him. He told his readers that the Negro slaves of the South are the happiest and, in some sense, the freest people in the world. Clearly, Americans had no deficit of justifications for why they had the right to own black people as slaves. However, all of these justifications were meant to do one thing: hide the fact that the real reason why white people enslaved black people is because of greed, profit, and power. Slavery was an economic system that produced extreme wealth, and white supremacy was the ideological justification that upheld it. The reason why white people came up with so many justifications for slavery is because in their heart they knew that it was wrong. They knew that they had no right to exploit and brutalize black people, so they constantly had to reassure themselves and ease their conscience. They had to constantly defend and justify a system that was clearly evil. They had to find some way to sleep at night.
This woman just said, if the trauma of slavery lives in the epigenetics of black people, she's a black woman, then doesn't the evil of slave owning live in the epigenetics of white people? And I would argue yes. My family, my heritage, I am Irish Mexican and a little bit of Germanic, but I also learned at my family reunion last year with our second cousins. Our oldest relative came over on the Mayflower and had a slave with him. Now, my grandmother married my grandpa, her being some mud of whiteness, and my grandfather being deep native Mexican. Her father was vindictively racist. His name was also Camillus, which is the most comically evil name I've ever heard. But she always says that her father's mother was the actual devil, and that we are breeding the evil out of us. And I actually feel it. I feel like a vindictive cruelty in my own mouth sometimes. I know words I could use to dismantle people, and I've learned to stop that impulse, but it only got easier when I stopped hating myself and falling in love with life and falling in love with the beauty of nature. But I think a lot of people, because they refuse to acknowledge that cruelty innate to their genetic makeup, they'll never escape it, and they will never make the conscious effort to breed it out of them. And obviously, like, I'm not saying you have to marry a person of color as a white person to, like, clean up the bloodline and the genetics. I'm saying you have to do a lot of deep and intentional work on yourself. You have to find that vein of malice and cut it at the root and suture it shut. And you just have to be aware of yourself.
So today we are reacting on this video where Black Americans clapped back so hard at this guy who was trying to downplay slavery. Yeah, and from what I've seen, this wasn't going to become at all. Because let's get into this. And guys, do you really have to discuss this? Why are they so obsessed with the black community and what happened to them? Yeah, why are they not letting go of what happened a long time ago instead of pushing the agenda that the blacks are pushing? They're trying to show us how diminishing the black community is. Yeah, to a point that someone is discussing slavery. Nah. And you know, the problem is, how do people even start speaking about slavery just so casually, like it's any other topic? Yeah, that's where the problem starts. That's where the real problem starts. By the way, people talk about slavery just like it's something normal, yeah, but for a lot of people it's not just the past. Yeah, it's something that still affects real lives today, and we all know that slavery is affecting the real lives today. The way we are living today, the inequalities, it's from way back then. And that's something that many people don't really want to accept that. And that's why this reaction is so strong, because when someone feels like you are minimizing something that's so serious, yeah, they are going to fire back. And honestly, I get it, yeah. You can't expect people to stay quiet when you're speaking about their history, yeah. Like, it's just normal. Whatever happened to them is just normal. No, you can't expect that reaction. People are going to fire back at you. And this is what this gentleman got for speaking really diminishing about the slavery that was happening to the black community. Yeah? But at the same time, let's be real, this is where conversations break down. Instead of understanding each other, the intention turns into emotions, yeah? But at the same time, let's be real, yeah? You can't just let this conversation go like that, because this is where conversations break down. And instead of people understanding each other, it turns into tension, yeah? Emotions rises, and it becomes, and wait, that nobody's going to listen to each other. No, the white community, no, neither the black is going to listen to each other, regardless of who is right. Yeah, it turns into a fight of who's right and who's wrong. Yeah, and let's get this right. It's not about fighting. It's just about understanding what the other party is saying. Yeah, what the other party needs. Yeah, because I've seen people saying that Black History Month is not something that should be celebrated because there is no White History Month. Comparison is what is bringing these tensions between us. But still, though, we don't ignore how it all started. You just can't come into a conversation already dismissing what the other people experienced. Yeah, like, you own it. What do you expect them? Respect goes both ways, yeah? Respect is something that is mandatory also. It goes both ways. You can't talk down on something serious and then be surprised when people are bringing up responses, yeah? This is something that you should expect, because you just can't come in and dismiss what people experienced. Things that are affecting their daily lives. No. And this whole situation shows something bigger. It's not just about one conversation. It's about how people view history, how they talk about it, yeah? And whether they actually take time to understand the different perspectives. But yeah, I want to know, was this really necessary for the veteran to go out talking like that about the Black history and the Black slavery, like dismissing everything that happened to them? Was it really something that was just for him to do? Coming in and doing that? Yeah? Drop your comments. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me see what you guys think. Let's talk about this, because this is something that we really do need to discuss. Yeah? And don't forget to subscribe. Push the subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and also share it around. Catch you in the next one.